The reading that leads us into the message is from John 14, verses 15 through 21. In them, Jesus emphasizes the importance of love in knowing God. Thank you, Janet. In following that path, we discover and reveal God's true nature to the world, in and outside the fence. Hear these words from John 14, 15 through 21. If you love me, you will keep my commandments, and I will ask the Father, and he will give you another advocate to be with you forever. This is the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive because it neither sees him or knows him. But you know him because he abides with you and will be in you. I will not leave you orphans, says Jesus. I am coming to you. In a little while the world will no longer see me, but you will see me because I live. And because I live, you also will live. On that day you will know that I am in my Father, and you in me, and I in you. They who have my commandments and keep them are those who love me. And those who love me will be loved by my Father, and I will love them and reveal myself to them. The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
So imagine, if you will, that we're sitting at a table the night before Jesus' crucifixion. We know this table. We know this table, and this is the table that, in fact, he is speaking to the disciples from with these words that he shared. They're the same words, or a part of a continuing conversation Jesus is having with the disciples on that last night that he dined with them. Think about this. If you know that you're leaving, do you want to leave a legacy? What would you tell people if you knew you were leaving? For a long trip where you didn't know the outcome? For whatever reason. In the final quarter of the chaplain residency, we were given a project to do. We had a project every quarter along with many, many other things. And in our last quarter as chaplains, we were asked to leave a legacy, to do a legacy project that would give hope and counsel to the people who would follow us, that were just going to begin a very intense year of study in learning to do the things that chaplains do. Mine contained everything from names and numbers that you could call to books that I used when my hair was going gray by the second, to just the experience that I had and what it meant to me. That's a bit like what's happening here with Jesus. In these words, we've been kind of following this along for a bit now, this sitting with Jesus at a table as he speaks to his disciples and tries to impart to them, knowing that he's going, A, that he is going, and B, that they're not to be afraid. Last week we talked about Jesus' constant saying to them, that place where we could rest, that says, if all else is coming apart, know that I am the way. This is a continuation of that conversation. As a way of taking a look at how these verses might speak to us, I started looking them through the eyes of how Jesus might have presented it, because there's a little bit here for everyone. If you love me, you will keep my commandments, says Jesus. Now imagine the disciples sitting, they're having dinner, and he's giving them all this serious conversation, and they're getting a little flustered because there's clear implication that he's leaving. And so can you imagine how not concentrated you might be on what this person is saying if you're a little concerned about what happens next and what that might mean for you, and so on and so on. And what Jesus says is, if you love me, keep my commandments. It sort of balances. It's like a resting place. Keep my commandments. And I'm reading this and I go, well, it's not like I don't know what they are, but in the moment I might be going, which one? All of them? There are 10 commandments. There's the Mosaic Law. Are those the commandments? What commandments are we talking about? Well, earlier in that same conversation, Jesus had already told them, I give you a new commandment, he said. Love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love me and one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. Seems simple enough, doesn't it? But what does that mean? It's easy to get so tied up in definitions and the how and wherefore that we forget the simplicity of simply being the best self that we can be with Christ as our center and giving love. Corinthians tells us that love is patient and kind. It's not boastful or arrogant or rude. The Bible tells us throughout that God is love, and the evidence of God is written in scriptures from beginning to end. There's no guesswork here. The command to love one another, however, is Jesus asking us to focus literally on one another. Serve one another, because as you do that, you serve me. Love one another, and in that you will not only know my love, but the love of God as well. Then he goes on and he says, and I will ask the Father, and he will give you another advocate, someone besides me. An advocate that will be with you forever, the Spirit of truth that the world cannot receive because it neither sees him or knows him, but you do, because he abides with you and will be in you. How do we know? What does it look like? Wait a minute, now what? Can you imagine? Here they are going, what? What do you mean by an advocate? We want you. We're committed to you. We know you. And when we go over the fence, you bring us back in and teach us again. How will this advocate do that? Well, he goes on to say, the Spirit that would be given forever, with and within them. We know the actual descent of Spirit to being within us as Pentecost Sunday, which is coming. They weren't there yet. Jesus was telling them what was coming. It was a way to remind them that he would always be with them and to prepare them for what they could not possibly see in the moment, how their life would change. He's very clear in his commandment and his support in these words, love one another. And if you love one another, I will be in you, God will be in you, and with you will be a Spirit to guide and teach you even when I'm not here. There was another piece of this that really struck me as I was reading, because this may have spoken really to the heart of it. I will not leave you orphaned. I am coming to you. I was 28 years old when my mother died. She was just shy of her 49th birthday. My biological father was 28 years older than my mom and outlived her by 17 years. He died when he was 93 years old in 1999. I was 45. My stepfather was already 6 years into an estrangement that didn't make sense to me. So when my dad died too, I had that moment that said, oh my goodness, this is what it means to be an orphan. Who will I be without these people in my life? Because it's true that we define our lives by the people who are in them, by the certainty of our day-to-day, by where we came from and what we do. It's who we are. But when anything gets in the way of that, when anything happens to disturb that certainty, there's that moment where we might just feel as though we are orphaned and without identity. Jesus says, but you are not. I am your identity. I will not leave you orphaned. I will be with you always. I am coming to you. The Spirit will abide in you. As you love one another, I will be in you and you in me. It's a powerful statement because that identity is such an important part of us. And I'm sure it's not a new thing. I'm talking to folks who are, generally speaking, a minute or two older than me overall. And so many of your parents are gone. Not all. I think of Nell, who's 100. Elsie, who just passed away this year, who was 100. But anywhere along that continuum, that loss, that interruption, that gap, that who am I now, shows up. And again, Jesus says to us, I will not leave you. I will not leave you. Again, we're sitting at a table. Disciples looking at Christ as he listens, as he speaks to those who are there present with him. The people who should have known this down to their toes after 3 years of examples of living and loving and what does it mean and what does it look like. As you know, I am studying for course of study, and this week's theological text was called Basic Christianity by John Stott. In it, he says that basically Jesus' complete devotion to God and to others is the biblical definition of love. This commandment that we've been given as disciples today at the table of Christ. How do we do it? We're not programmed for that. I love the jumping the fence because it's stuck there now because that's what we do. So how do we get back? And can we give like Jesus gives, for goodness sake? Always putting the other person first? Can we? It sounds impossible. I mean, we have things to do, we have jobs and so on and so forth. But what sits behind how we enter in? If not to give what we can give. To give knowing that what we receive is God's love in return, which fills and renews us so that we can give more, and you get the idea. To look at the lowest and the least and yada-da-da, all those things that we know scripturally that are more than just a literal poor people or those who are in need that are there. But for all those places where we are poor, in spirit or emotionally, where the people around us are in need in ways that aren't always obvious and can't always be seen. We hold our identity in Christ. How do we hold it? By loving as Christ loves, by following a commandment, by listening into these words that he's speaking here at a table for us today, even as he might have so many, many centuries ago. In a little while, says Jesus, the world will no longer see me, but you will see me. Because I live, you will also live. This is God's promise to us in the death and resurrection of Christ, who gave so much that he was willing to give his life, that we might know forgiveness and love beyond our imagining. On that day you will know that I am in my Father, and you in me, and I in you. I have told you this before it occurs, so that when it does, you may believe. We talk about love a lot as Christians. We talk a lot about love and its application a lot. It's not the easiest thing to do, this loving, in any context. But it's important. There's a story about a woman in England some 600 years ago. In Norwich, England, this woman walked into a cell attached to a parish church. She intended to stay there for the rest of her life. This is 600 years ago. The original name of this woman is unknown, and the cell where she would live all of her life as an anchoress a woman devoted to life of contemplation and solitude, no longer exists. It's likely that she took her name from the church in whose cell she lived, which was the Church of St. Julian in Norwich, England. Everything we know about Julian of Norwich comes from a manuscript that she composed while she lived in this cell. In it, she tells that at the age of 31, she fell desperately ill. Prayer after prayer after prayer, she lifted up to God until she was at a point where she knew that she surely must die, and suddenly the pain and the illness disappeared. As she continued to pray, she was visited by a series of 16 visions or revelations, which she called showings. They were the way in which she came to experience God's love for her. Within the next 20 years of those 16 visions, she expanded on them, praying into them, living into them, trying to understand the mystery of God's presence in our lives, or certainly in hers. In the final chapter of this book called Showings, that is now available, she revealed a God whose deep desire to know and love us just exists, despite our humanness, despite the things that we do or don't do. This is what she writes. From the time that it was revealed, I desired to know what it was, what the Lord's meaning was. 15 years later and more, I was answered in spiritual understanding. As it was said, what? Do you wish to know your Lord's meaning in this thing? Know it well. Love was his meaning. Who reveals it to you? Love. What did he reveal to you? Love. Why? Why did God reveal it to you? For love. Remain in this knowingness, and you will know more of the same, but you will never know different without end. Jesus sat at a table with his disciples, trying to bring to life for them that which would live on when he was gone. I am the way, says Jesus. Live in love, and you will know me and see me and be in me, and you will know the Father, and the Father will know you. If all else fails, I am the way, and what am I if not love? In all its iterations, in all the ways you might imagine delivering it. Love lived as God would have us live it. Jesus didn't ask the disciples to serve him. He asked them to serve others. Jesus didn't come so he could be all important, although clearly he is for us. But it wasn't about making a name for himself or being at the top of anyone's list. It was simply to give and do and serve and model for us this God, this almighty, wondrous God that we worship in ways that we couldn't possibly imagine otherwise. These words in today's scripture, the words that we talk about all the time, aren't words. They're actionable things. We saw Jesus do it. We may not be able to deliver as Jesus does, but with practice and just a little effort to step outside of the stories we might tell that are not favorable to things that might be, to how we speak to one another, to where we lend an extra hand, to where we do things to a place where it becomes so ingrained in us that the love of God truly comes alive. To be disciples of love. He doesn't intend for us to use the knowledge that we have in any other way but this. As he visits with the disciples, as he visited with Julian of Norwich, as he sits with us in the congregation today, the legacy he's asking us to live out in his name is simply this: love. It's his gift to us. It's our gift to one another. It's how we know God, show God, and bring God to the world. May it be so. Amen and amen.